This bottle of whiskey is cursed, and I'm the reason why. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey on the West Coast. My name is Matt, and today I wanted to share with you a Father's Day whiskey story that started all the way back in 2011 with the Vancouver Canucks in the Stanley Cup playoffs. One of my favorite things to do with my dad was to watch Vancouver Canucks games, to talk Vancouver Canucks hockey, to debate Vancouver Canucks hockey, and to go to the games. And somehow, if you're not familiar, the Vancouver Canucks are an NHL team. They're an ice hockey team located in Vancouver, British Columbia. It happened to be my hockey team that I support, the team my dad supported. And somehow, back in 1970, my dad became a Vancouver Canucks fan, living on the opposite coast of Canada in Nova Scotia, in New Scotland. I don't know how that happened because it's a 4-hour time difference. So when a game starts, it would have been, I think, 11 o'clock at night when a Vancouver Canucks game would start. So it's impressive. Regardless, he became a Canucks fan, and therefore I became a Canucks fan. We loved watching the games. And as of 2011, the Canucks had never won a Stanley Cup. But we had a fantastic team. We had the best team in the league. They actually won the President's Trophy, which was the trophy for winning the league. And so we were very excited when the playoffs came. In the playoffs, there's 4 rounds of playoff hockey to win the Stanley Cup. You have to win each round. It's a knockout tournament. And so being so excited, we decided to go to our very first ever Canucks playoff game. Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals against the Chicago Blackhawks, our arch nemesis at the time, the Chicago Blackhawks. And the Canucks won this game. It was a fantastic moment. And it's a fantastic memory I have. Jannik Hansen scored a goal. Chris Higgins scored another. The Canucks went on to shut out the Chicago Blackhawks 2-0 on the back of a Roberto Luongo shutout performance. It was wonderful. We were stoked, absolutely excited. And so the playoffs went, and the Canucks won in 7 games against the Blackhawks. They beat the Nashville Predators. They took care of the San Jose Sharks in the Western Conference Finals in 5 games. And they met the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Final. Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, first one that of my adult life that I had an opportunity to go to. So I went to the game with a buddy, a friend of mine, Trevor. Shout out to Trevor here. Game 1 against the Boston Bruins was a tight affair. And luckily for us, with 19 seconds left in the third period, 19 seconds left in the game, Raffi Torres scored a breakaway goal against Tim Thomas, the goaltender for the Boston Bruins. And the Canucks won 1-0. And we're on top of the world. It was fantastic. I was so excited. Game 2, in overtime, Alexander Burrows, skated around the net, wrapped it around, and was able to fire home the game winner in overtime. Make it 2-0 for the Vancouver Canucks. Just in case you're not familiar, you need to win 4 games of a 7-game series to win the series, and in this case, win the Stanley Cup. Up 2-0 in this series, and with Father's Day coming up, I wanted to be able to give my dad something special for him to open, pour, and enjoy if we won the Stanley Cup. My family's originally from Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, and when I was fairly young, we moved to the west coast of Canada, British Columbia. But that means I'm kind of a bit of East Coast on the West Coast. Whiskey on the West Coast, this is where I've lived almost my whole life, but I bring the East Coast with me. And it just so happens that North America's first dedicated single malt distillery was founded in 1989 on Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. And so the distillery is named the Glenora Distillery, and the whiskey they make is named Glen Breton Rare. And they got into a little bit of trouble with the Scotch Whisky Association for using terms like Glen and calling it Glen Breton, but I mean, it's in a valley on the island of Cape Breton in a place that's called New Scotland, where they still speak Gaelic and teach it in schools. So I think it's fair play. Anyways, the Glen Breton 10-year-old, this bottle right here, had just in 2011 been distributed and was being sold at a whiskey shop the next town over from me. I thought this has to be the perfect whiskey for us to celebrate this very special West Coast victory with an East Coast flair. It's from our home, from the place my father was from. And I thought, yeah, that's perfect. I was in university at the time, so this bottle cost about $100 Canadian. And that was a bit of a stretch for me financially, but it was a splurge. And I thought it was the perfect time to do so. The 2011 Stanley Cup Final Series was slated to end before Father's Day, so I knew I had to give this gift to my father, an early Father's Day gift, to him, so that we could celebrate with it on the day that the Canucks won, if they did. So I gave this bottle of whiskey, this one right here to the left of me, to my dad early, with one stipulation, that he was only allowed to open it when the Vancouver Canucks won the Stanley Cup. I cursed this bottle. The Boston Bruins began to forge a comeback, and they beat the Vancouver Canucks in Game 3 and Game 4 in Boston, sending the series back to Vancouver for Game 5. Game 5, the Canucks won, sent it back to Boston with the possibility of winning the Stanley Cup in Boston. Something they didn't do. Sorry, spoilers, guys. It's 12 years later. I hope that wasn't a spoiler. Anyways, that set up a final and decisive Game 7 on home ice in Vancouver. Vancouver Canucks, Boston Bruins, winner takes all game to decide who gets that Stanley Cup. In Game 7 in Vancouver in June of 2011, the Boston Bruins defeated the Vancouver Canucks to win the Stanley Cup. And it broke my heart. It broke the city's heart. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but after this Game 7 loss, where the Boston Bruins paraded around our home arena, Rogers, GM Place at the time, actually, Vancouver rioted that night. There's a lot of terrible footage and stories and a lot of terrible things that were done that night. But it just shows you how much this gripped our city. And so it was. The Canucks would go on for at least another 12 years without winning the Stanley Cup. Still no cup. It's 2023, and I'm still waiting. And that means that this bottle is still cursed. It sat on a shelf, mocking us from afar, unopened, and unenjoyed, unappreciated. My parents would make occasional trips back to Cape Breton Island every once in a while, but it was a really long trip. If you're not familiar, Canada's a huge country. The distance between Vancouver, British Columbia, and Sydney, Nova Scotia is actually just about 6,000 kilometers, which there's more distance between those two places than there is between New York City, New York, and London, England. There's essentially an ocean between us, an ocean of land. But they'd make these trips to visit family. And on these trips, they'd often take day trips and go on excursions. One of the things that you can do on Cape Breton Island, which looks a lot like the Highlands of Scotland, and maybe that's why they originally settled there, because it looked a lot like home to these Scottish migrants, is to drive the Cabot Trail. It's gorgeous. Cabot Trail National Park is beautiful. I actually have driven it myself a few times, and I've really enjoyed it. And that just happens to be where the Glenora Distillery is located. Now, my parents decided to tour the distillery. And my dad reasoned that while he was at the source of the whiskey, maybe, just maybe, it was okay for him to try it. Besides the point, the bottle that was cursed, the agreement was this bottle would remain unopened until the Canucks won the cup. He wasn't opening this bottle. So my dad, while visiting Glenora Distillery on the tour, tried for the first time a whiskey that he'd been wanting to try for years, which was the Glen Breton Rare 10-year-old. And he really enjoyed it. I was a little saddened at first and miffed that he got to try it. I was like, that is against the rules. You're not allowed to do that. But I warmed to the idea. I was like, you know what? Spirit of the rules, it's there. I mean, the bottle's unopened, no harm, no foul. So it became a new rule that you could only try the Glen Breton Rare 10-year-old single malt if you're at the source, if you're at the distillery. In late 2018, my father fell ill and was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And he, through surgeries, through radiation, through chemo, he fought this disease. He fought it with a smile on his face, a sense of humor, even through so much pain, so much hardship. He fought it with pride and dignity and with a spirit to live each day to its fullest, loving those around him and enjoying the life that he had. And I was so happy and proud of him for when he was able to finally retire from his job in March of 2020, literally the week as the pandemic was about to start and close everything down. And sadly, in 2021, he lost his battle with this illness and he passed away due to this cancer. This past fall, as a family, we were able to return back to Cape Breton Island, visit family, and lay my father to rest back home where he wanted to be. And at the end of this trip, I was actually able to take the opportunity to drive the Cabot Trail once again through the Cape Breton Highlands National Park. Like I said, it's gorgeous. It's just a beautiful place. What this also meant was that I had the opportunity to visit the Glenora Distillery, which of course I couldn't pass up. The grounds of the distillery are absolutely stunning. They're gorgeous. It's a beautiful whitewashed walls of the distillery. I believe there was ivy, cask stacked up in front, and a gorgeous stream that's the water source for the distillery that runs right through the middle. It's located in this quiet valley that was just so picturesque. It was really quite the place to be able to visit. Upon visiting the distillery, we decided to sign up for a tour. Obviously, I mean, we're at the distillery. We're going to see how it works. And as we're looking upon the mash tun, the wooden washbacks, the distillery apparatus as a whole, the tour guide handed out glasses of the Glen Breton Rare 10-year-old single malt whiskey, the same whiskey that I have here beside me, just a different batch. And I couldn't help but view this tour with thoughts of my father. We moved towards the stillhouse. I decided to hang back from the group and to take a long pause. I hadn't really fully known whether or not I'd actually drink the whiskey. I hadn't decided whether or not I would actually sip the 10-year-old. I came to the decision that if not now, then when? When was a better opportunity? And truly, what's a better opportunity than a trip that was a celebration of my father's life, of the things that he loved, the places he visited, and the people that mattered to him? There was no better place for me to go ahead and try this whiskey than at the distillery on that trip at that time. In this place where he once stood, drinking the same whiskey, it was an opportunity in a way to share one more dram with him, one more glass. And I took it as such. I took my time enjoying that whiskey. I hung back from the group, again, with thoughts of him, enjoying each sip. It wasn't the best whiskey I had at the distillery, far from it, but I believe it was the most meaningful and poignant one. I'm thankful that I went ahead and I had that whiskey and I had that experience in the same place he did. And so this bottle still remains unopened. I recently went looking for this bottle at my parents' home and found it in a cabinet. I guess the mocking of this bottle on the shelf was too much to bear at one point, or maybe we were too far away from the cup for it to matter to be on the shelf. And so I found it in a cabinet on its side. And if you're big into whiskey, you know you don't lay distilled spirits on their side with a cork, because you can get cork rot and cork taint, and it can spoil the whiskey. And upon further inspection, I found chunks of cork floating in this whiskey. And I fully believe that the whiskey inside is more than likely spoiled. But I won't know if it is until the Canucks win the cup, when I actually finally open this bottle of single malt. Glenora, if you happen to watch this video, and you want to do something to replace it with another bottle, or if you have something similar that might be a good stand-in, by all means, maybe you can help me with that. I don't know. As we left the distillery on that day, it was a beautiful moment because as we were walking out to our car, we could hear friggin' bagpipes in the background. It was just gorgeous. It was so quiet, but those bagpipes in the background, somewhere off in the distance in the hills. It was a beautiful moment. I hope those who are blessed to still have their fathers with them, that you're able to celebrate this Father's Day with a glass of something special and just enjoy each other's company. I hope it's a special day for those who are being celebrated. Please be safe, drink responsibly. Too much of any good thing is a bad thing. And alcohol is now considered a carcinogen. So please be careful, respect it, and take care of yourselves. And for those remembering a loved one that they've lost on this Father's Day, I hope you can find a suitable way to pay tribute to their memory. I'm sure they'll be in your thoughts, as my father will be in my thoughts. And so today, I'm drinking something that reminds me of him. My father loved rum. He liked whiskey, but he really appreciated rum. And so for Christmas one year, he received this rum from my sister, and it's the Ron Zacapa 23-year-old rum. And I'm not as well versed on rum as I am whiskey, but it's a Guatemalan rum. It's aged at altitude and aged for 23 years. And every time I think of this rum, I think of him. And I can't have a sip of this rum without thinking of him. So I thought of nothing better, nothing else more fitting than to enjoy a glass of this in his memory as I record this video. Thank you guys for sticking with me for this story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it brought you to a place where you had your loved ones on your mind and that you enjoyed it in some small way. I'm going to enjoy this glass of rum in honor of my dad, and I hope to bring you more whiskey content in the future. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for listening and for joining me for this story. Sláinte.